of me and my brother in the blizzard of 93, the aftermath of it. I am the little guy there. How old was I? Four and a half, in 93. And like I was saying before everybody got on, I'm not sure if I remember much of the actual blizzard itself or if I just remember the home videos that I saw afterwards. But I've always been fascinated by the blizzard of 93, ever since, I don't know, maybe a couple of years after this, maybe right after it happened. Um, and while I don't have a single event that I can pinpoint as being like, this is what made me want to be a meteorologist, this probably had a pretty strong influence on that. I can remember being 4, 5, 6 years old and drawing weather maps and just for the fun of it. And I grew up watching the local forecast on the Weather Channel. That was like my favorite TV show. Um, and so, I mean, it might maybe all traces back to this storm for me. There were some other storms in the 90s as well that also had a big influence on me, but this may have been what started it all. So this picture is from Groton. This is the room I'm in right now. I bought the house from my parents, so I still live here, and I haven't seen a snowbank like that in the 30 years since then. So this was definitely quite the storm. So I've got a lot of stuff to go over here. Anytime I do a talk on a specific weather event, I like to kind of set the stage and give a little bit of a meteorology lesson on some of the different aspects of the storm, just in kind of a general term, just to help you understand a bit more the actual fine details of the storm. Then I'll talk about the storm itself across really the North America, especially Eastern North America. And then I'll zoom in down into Central New York and get real specific about some of the things we saw right here. And then, what are some things that we can learn from this? What sort of an impact did this have in the science of meteorology? Things like that as we wrap up. So we'll start off with the weather lessons. The first thing we're going to talk about is the jet stream. You hear jet stream mentioned on TV frequently enough. It's basically ribbons of fast moving air that are high up in the atmosphere, usually 30, 40,000 feet, which is about where the airplanes fly. A lot of times the airplanes like to fly in the jet stream if they're going east because it helps with fuel economy and makes the trip a lot faster. If you're flying west, you don't really want to be flying through a strong jet stream. That wouldn't do well for your fuel economy or your time. Jet streams act is really kind of a main pathway and driver for weather systems across the global scale. They tend to separate cold air to their north and warm air to their south, at least in the northern hemisphere. Of course, it's flipped down south. And depending on, there's a lot of energy that's associated with all that air moving around, and that can help to develop low pressure systems. So here's kind of just a classic sort of normal jet stream. We got a winds of 100 to 150 miles an hour. And again, that's way up high in the atmosphere, but it's going to carry the weather systems along and kind of set the stage for everything else that happens thereafter. Now, the jet stream sometimes kind of goes straight east to west with little meanders, but sometimes it's these big peaks and valleys. The bigger the peaks and the valleys, usually the more intense the weather is going to end up being. That's when that energy really can start cranking things up. There's often also multiple jet streams in a hemisphere. So this time of year, especially, we tend to see the polar jet, which is more in our area. In the summer, the polar jet goes far to the north and usually it kind of breaks down. And then there's also the subtropical jet, which tends to stay to the south. Now, if these two can phase up so that their troughs, that's the more technical term, are lined up, or even better, if the two come together and merge, that's when we can get some really big weather going on. Low pressure systems tend to stay just ahead of the trough. And that's, everything's all related. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg, which comes first, which thing is influencing which. The cold air tends to sit in a trough. Part of that's because of the jet stream, part of that's because the low pressure is pulling the cold air down further south. So it's all interconnected, and it's more like a web instead of a linear progression of things. Speaking of low pressure systems, these are our storm systems. Winds around a low pressure are going to flow counterclockwise and inwards towards the low. So that's why usually out ahead of a storm system, temperatures tend to warm up around here because we got the southerly winds ahead of it, and then it gets cold on the backside after. If you think of this past weekend, it was warm during the weekend, then it got really rainy, and then it got cold. That's because of that counterclockwise flow. The larger the differences in the pressure, the stronger the winds are going to be. So as our low pressure gets stronger and stronger, the winds are also going to get stronger and stronger. And then if you also have a strong high pressure, which is the exact opposite, bumping up against the low pressure, that can really get the winds going. High pressures are usually associated with fair weather. They often tend to take up more space than a low pressure. They're often much larger. The winds are going to flow the opposite direction, so they're going to go clockwise, and they're going to tend to go out from the high pressure. So if you put the two together, winds will flow clockwise out from the high and then kind of spiral inwards counterclockwise towards the low. Now, when in the winter times, if we get a high pressure in just the right spot, kind of as illustrated in this one, we get this northeast or north wind that comes down the eastern seaboard, and it traps cold air between the Atlantic Ocean and the Appalachian Mountains. The mountains act as like a big cold air dam, and it's called cold air damming. And that's going to have a role in the blizzard of 93 for sure. So here's a chart of typical pressures, some more extreme pressures that we see. There's lots of different ways to measure pressure. Sometimes you'll see it in inches, other times in millibars. I've got millibars here. The kind of standard meteorological measurement is hectopascals, which is the exact same thing as a millibar. So they can be used interchangeably. But I'll be referring to millibars from here on out. Right now, my pressure is at 1031, so we're up here on the higher side of the high pressure right now. Standard pressure is about 1013. Weak low pressure is about 1000. And I see I forgot to update the max and minimum pressure. I can get that for you real quick. So far this year, which is almost done now, the highest pressure I've recorded is 1046. So that's way up here. And the lowest pressure is 986. So, and not too far off from what I actually had labeled this when I redid it back in, I think it was February. Once you start getting down in the 980s, 970s, those are the pressures you start to see in hurricanes or really, really strong low pressure systems. 960 is about the record low pressure measured in New York State. Anything below that, then you're talking about the real big storms. So as the jet stream moves low pressure and high pressure systems across the globe, they're going to shift air masses around. And whenever you have a change from one air mass to another, there's usually a front that is kind of marking the line from that. It's usually not a very gradual change, at least when going from warm to cold. It's usually kind of a sudden break, maybe over the course of a day or two, but it's noticeable. That's because the cold front comes through. So whenever you hear front, you can just think that it's just the leading edge of a new air mass. So a warm front means warm air is coming in, cold front means cold air is coming in. And they're all kind of driven by those counterclockwise winds around the low pressure. So like I mentioned earlier, you got the warm air coming up ahead of it, cold air coming back down behind. So this is kind of a classic structure where the warm front extends east from the low, cold front extends south, and maybe out ahead of it. Whenever you see the symbols on the weather map kind of alternate, that usually means some sort of stationary front that's not really moving. So there's usually some sort of a wind shift there, but the cold air and the warm air aren't really able to dislodge one another. And fronts are really important for weather because that's when you are changing air masses, that's when you're going to get a lot of lift in the atmosphere. And that's when clouds and precipitation end up happening. Now, nor'easters are a special type of low pressure system that really, they're pretty unique because there's several different geographic and oceanic, I guess that's how you say it, factors that go into making low pressures. So in the wintertime, the best recipe for a nor'easter is when we've got that high pressure to the north that's bringing cold air down and trapping it between the coast and the Appalachian Mountains. Over the Atlantic, it's very warm because we got the Gulf Stream current that's right offshore. So we get this big contrast between cold air and warm air, and that usually causes it's kind of like a semi-permanent stationary front right off the coast. And if the jet stream comes and gives a little energy to the atmosphere, we can get low pressures that will form along that front. It'll bring more warm air north, bring more cold air down to the south, and that'll cause it to really rapidly intensify. Um, Lately, the media has gotten hold of the term bomb cyclone, and that is something that meteorologists have been talking about for a long time, and it has a very technical definition. Um, and I don't think the media really pays attention to that technical definition. They just see a big storm and say, "Oh, it must be a bomb cyclone," because that's going to sell stories. Um, so a bomb cyclone is when the pressure drops 24 millibars or more in 24 hours. So that's kind of like a real rapid intensification of a storm. And you'll mostly see that with a nor'easter. Nor'easters really depend on the exact track that they take, which is they're going to follow that coastal front. So if the coastal front sets up further offshore, that's when the big cities are going to get their big snows. If the coastal front's right along the coast, that's when we get the big snows and the cities get rain. Um, so it all, that's always the big question with nor'easters is where exactly is that track going to be? Um, and these are real massive storms that you can see in this satellite picture here that this nor'easter actually even has an eye like a hurricane. Hurricanes are just another type of low pressure system, so it just gives you kind of, if you're trying to compare a nor'easter to something, a hurricane might be one of your closest comparisons. So there's a lot of wind that's coming in off the Atlantic Ocean that causes massive beach erosion and flooding, um, humongous waves out over the Atlantic. So lots of different hazards can be associated with nor'easters, and they're usually very large, so they usually affect a lot of people. Um, Now we're going to take a slightly different detour here and talk about squall lines. They are more usually associated with summertime events, such as what I've got here is the Labor Day storm in 1998 that hit Syracuse. That was a special squall line called a derecho. The characteristic of squall lines is usually that they're relatively narrow, but very long and very intense. Um, Oftentimes they're accompanied by strong winds. Sometimes they have tornadoes embedded in them. They can produce widespread damage, some of it very intense, such as what Syracuse saw in 1998. And we will have a squall line in the blizzard of 93, nowhere near us, but it is just another marker of how intense and impressive this storm system was. I'll also have to talk about storm surge, which is what you usually hear when talking about hurricanes. Um, so when a hurricane's coming on shore, the winds are so strong and so steady that it literally just pushes the ocean up onto the land, kind of like this graphic here. It's not a wave, it's just literally the ocean being pushed on shore. And that's actually one of the most dangerous parts of a hurricane. And people often, the people who say, "Oh, there's a hurricane, let's go out to the beach and watch it," and they're going to get caught by the storm surge, and that's when they get in big trouble. Um, the topography of the land has a lot to do with how high the storm surge is in certain areas. Wind direction, wind speed, all those are factors as well. Okay, so that was a lot, I know. I'm not going to give you a test, don't worry. But now we're going to put it all together into one big storm, the storm of the century. So we start off several days before this happened. Really even several years before this happened. There had been some big misses by meteorologists calling for these big epic snowstorms and then they didn't end up happening. And people in the big cities, you know, especially were preparing for all this snow, and then it didn't happen. And so nor'easter forecasts were not very good up through the 80s and into the early 90s. And so this monster of a storm starts showing up on the models about 5 days beforehand and became really intense about 3 days out. Um, and what they were showing is they're taking a weak storm over the Gulf of Mexico and then bringing it along that coastal front on the East Coast and really just exploding it into this monster of a storm. And I can attest from a meteorologist's standpoint that like when you see something extreme on the models, it's a fine balance between trying to warn people and you know accepting that this sort of a thing could happen while also balancing the uncertainty that goes with it. And so I can imagine that the meteorologist saw this kind of unprecedented scenario unfolding, having that history of several misses in the previous years. It had to be a real hard forecast to make, to come out and say that the storm was going to be as bad as it could be.
Blizzard of 93.
And so if this forecast ends up coming true, that's going to be a real big step forward for people trusting meteorologists. If it's another miss, well, then the media is going to have a heyday with that. But you can see that this is the Boston Herald. It's the whole front page is just all about this blizzard that's coming. And so word got out pretty early that this was coming, and that's because there was a lot of agreement among the models and a lot of consistency with the models that this was going to happen and it was going to be something special. So that really gave people time to prepare. And blizzard watches were issued well in advance, and people got to go raid the grocery stores, and here's a picture of people boarding up their house along the coast. So for as bad as the blizzard of 93 was, and we'll get to some of the unfortunate death toll statistics later, it could have been worse if there wasn't as much forecasting done beforehand. So the birth of it, we're starting on March 11th. This is about 2 or 3 days before it really cranks up here. And we have kind of a stationary coastal type front over the Gulf of Mexico, which is partially because of a strong high pressure over the middle of the country. Clockwise flow bringing lots of cold air down into the south, warm air associated with the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. So we've got our boundary, and we got a little bit of the low pressure that's going to start to develop along that over Mexico and Texas. Right from the start, this system, it was being impressive. Even as just a week low, it started producing some tornadoes over northern Mexico in the middle of March. So, right from the start, it didn't hold anything back. By 7 a.m. the next day, the low itself hadn't really changed in strength at all. But the high pressure has shifted off to the northeast, starts pumping that cold air down along the coast, trapping it between the mountains and the coast. Starting to get snow breaking out into parts of the deep south, rain along the coast. But still not like anything absolutely spectacular yet. 12 hours later, the lows dropped 17 millibars. So if you take that 24 millibar and 24-hour definition of a bomb cyclone, this went 17 in 12 hours, so that's more than a millibar per hour. So it's at this point what we would say bombing out. Rapid development. We've got two high pressures that are now feeding cold air into this system. One over the northern plains that's bringing cold air behind, and then that high pressure over New England that's continuing to funnel cold air down along the Mississippi. It gets very warm over Florida. Very warm and unstable, and we'll see the results of that in just a second. Already getting heavy snow across parts of Alabama, Tennessee, widespread snow spreading into the mid-Atlantic region already. So in just a span of 12 to 24 hours, it's really starting to ramp up. That night in Florida, a massive severe weather event happened from the blizzard of 93. This squall line developed out over the Gulf of Mexico and moved on shore about 11 p.m. It produced at least 11 tornadoes. I have strong suspicions that if this happened today, they would probably, because tornado science has advanced so much, especially with radar detection and also knowing about damage patterns to look for, I strongly suspect that they would find more than 11 tornadoes within the damage. 7 people were killed from those tornadoes overnight, and the wind damage. Tampa Bay measured a 96-mile-an-hour wind gust, and it created a storm surge of as much as 12 feet, which is, that's on par with like what a hurricane would do. And that sort of thing had never been seen before in a winter storm like this. There were constant winds over 50 miles an hour for about 12 hours, and that just kept the water high. And then on the backside, that cold air coming in, northern Florida actually saw 4 inches of snow from this storm. In all, there were 47 deaths in Florida. There were more drowning deaths from than from Hurricane Hugo and Andrew combined. A lot of that was because a 200-foot ship got capsized. And just in Florida alone, in 1993 dollars, it was $1.6 billion in damage. That squall line also extended all the way south down into Cuba, which happens once in a while that Cuba will get severe weather from a cold front, but it's so far south that usually the jet stream doesn't get that far south, and the whole picture of how the weather works in the tropics is completely different than it is up here in the mid latitudes. So this was a rare event, not necessarily unprecedented, but still pretty rare for Cuba, and just a large area of winds that were 70 to 100 plus miles an hour, causing damage that's equivalent to weak tornadoes just over a widespread area, kind of like what the Labor Day storm of 98 did in our area. Another 10 people and 200 people, another 10 people died and 200 were injured in Cuba, and another $1 billion of US dollars worth of damage. So by 7 a.m. on March 13th, this was Saturday, the low had dropped another 12 millibars, so it dropped 32 millibars in 24 hours. So it kind of blew away the definition of what a bomb cyclone was. Precipitation was starting to move up all the way into our area, even though the low itself was still back over Georgia. Very heavy snow falling on the backside all the way up into New Jersey. And as this low continued to increase, it just was sucking more and more cold air, and you can see all these arrows of cold air from the high pressure systems just feeding into it, pulling in warm air, warm moist air off the Atlantic Ocean to feed it. It's actually developing like multiple cold fronts with it, just really turning into that monster storm that it was showing on the models. There was a lot of cold air that got fed into the storm, and then even more cold air kind of behind it. And all these blue dots are record low temperatures that were set in the wake of the blizzard of 93. So it's just pretty much everywhere in the deep south was setting record lows. Just kind of an unprecedented cold air mass for that area. On March 14th, it's like 1 out of 5 weather stations across the whole United States set record low temperatures. 2 degrees in Birmingham, Alabama, 13 in Lexington, Mississippi. Atlanta, Georgia got down to 18. Even Vero Beach, Florida got down to 33. And these numbers in the parentheses are what the old daily record lows were. So, I mean, you're taking a record low from 27 to 20 is just, or from 27 to 2 degrees, that's just absolutely smashing the record into oblivion. By 7 p.m. on Saturday, March 13th, we're in the thick of it here in New York State. Most of the Northeast is getting hammered with snow. Right along the coast, there is a little bit of a mixture with some snow and rain. It might briefly turn to rain, but mostly snow. And at the peak of this is kind of the peak strength of it, when the storm was, near DC, Philadelphia, that area, and it had pressure of around 960 millibars. So that's about what a Category 3 hurricane would have for a pressure at that time. Yep, and that's pretty much where the record low is. I don't think the record low for New York State is actually from the blizzard of 93. Um, if it's not, it's very close to it, though. I can't quite remember exactly what set the record low for New York. Here is a satellite image showing this massive storm. This is a water vapor image, so these yellows and these brown colors are where there's lots of moisture. And this blue area you see here is actually dry air that's wrapping into the low pressure system. And that's very normal in the life cycle of a low pressure system. Eventually, this dry air will wrap all the way around and kind of cut the moisture off from the low, and that's what's going to cause the storm to eventually fall apart. But this is the kind of peak maturity of the storm, and this is the textbook definition, that you learn in meteorology class of, what a strong low pressure system looks like. So by 7 a.m. on March 14th, the storm is starting to weaken a little bit as that dry air comes in and cuts off the moisture. We call it's filling itself in. It's still an extremely strong low pressure system, but the pressure has risen up to 968 instead of being 960. Still plenty of snow on the backside, though the core of the heaviest snow has moved off. And some of that snow extends down the spine of the Appalachians. That cold, dry air over the southeast, that's the peak of the cold for those areas. That's when a lot of those record lows were being set right at this time. Okay, so let's zoom in now on our area. So Friday, March 12th was kind of the day of preparation. Here's the Syracuse Post Standard saying storm warning triggers flurry of panic. And it's hard to see in this picture, but those are bare grocery store shelves. I love this little quote that the Post Standard had in their caption here. "We're not crying wolf this time," a meteorologist says. And that just harkens back to what I was saying, that, there'd been some big misses in the years leading up to this. So it's like, we're really, really serious this time, guys. The whole state was under an emergency declaration. Stores, got cleaned out, and it was being called the worst storm of the century even before that happened. The peak of the storm was on Saturday and early Sunday for our area, and I was able to get hourly snow data for Syracuse, and that's what this graph shows. Anything in yellow is snow between 1 and 2 inches an hour. Orange is between 2 and 3 inches an hour, and red is over 3 inches an hour of snowfall. And this went on for a very long time, which of course resulted in those massive snow amounts. I was interested when I put this graph together that there's this bit of a lull in here between about 9 and 11 p.m. I'm not really sure what caused that. Maybe it was just the heavy snow band moving off a little bit, or if it was kind of a more widespread lull. Unfortunately, there's not really good radar data to go back and look at for this, at least not that I've been able to find yet. So that was an interesting part of this, kind of this two peaks here. And then it was a kind of gradual tapering off Sunday morning. Winds during this time were 20 to 30 miles an hour easily, gusts over 40 miles an hour. It was very cold, so it was a very fluffy snow, and it just blew all that snow all over the place. Here's a look at those winds. The yellow colors are sustained winds, around 30, 35 miles an hour. And that's not counting the wind gusts on top of that. That's just kind of the steady speed of the wind. And these little arrows are probably a little hard to see, but they're showing a northerly direction as that cold air is getting fed right into the low pressure system, which this was Saturday at 10 p.m. So that low was probably still back over maybe Virginia or somewhere at that time. Now, when it was all said and done, 1 to 4 feet of snow fell across central New York. Numerous records were broken throughout the region for different areas. Schools and businesses were closed for most of next week, even though this came on the weekend. Um, Based on the Syracuse Post Standard, the Monday after the storm, March 15th, there were no direct injuries from the storm in central New York. So that is a very good thing for our region. Here's some snow totals from around the area. Morrisville kind of led the way for central New York at 45 inches. Syracuse almost 43, Cortland 40, Tully, Auburn, Geneva all over 3 feet. Close to 30 inches. Skaneateles, Freeville getting down towards 2 feet. The Cornell station on Ithaca only measured 16 inches. And I'll go ahead to the next map. You'll see that's kind of a low anomaly in here. There could be several reasons for that. It could be that, since there's some other low amounts up through Seneca County and into even Wayne County, then down to Pennsylvania, it looks like maybe the heaviest snow band just missed Ithaca. I mean, Cortland got 40 inches and Ithaca got 16. So very, very tight gradient in the snow amounts there. There also could be problems measuring the snow potentially. So there's a few different ways that maybe that 16 inches could be low. But really, ultimately, there's no way to tell, and that's the number that's in the books. So that's what we go with. But definitely kind of the northeastern Finger Lakes region and up towards Syracuse. That's where the kind of the bullseye was locally. So here's some more stats, different records that was published in the Post Standard. And this was published in 93, so some of these records may be broken by now. I'm not 100% sure about that. But at the time, it was the biggest one storm snowfall from Syracuse, just breaking the record from the blizzard of 66. It helps set the record snowfall for that season, the record snowfall for March, record snowfall in 24 hours, a couple of daily record snowfalls, lowest temperatures. So all in all, there were 9 records set for Syracuse from this. And like I said, some of those may have been broken since then, but I would bet most of these are probably still standing. It was also, it's kind of hard to measure latest and greatest. Those are two different things, time and amount. But there hasn't been any storm later in the year that's even approached the blizzard of 93. So it's kind of the latest and greatest storm that we've got in our region on record. So now here's the slide that I always don't like to share. But in all, there were at least 256 deaths from this storm, even though it was well forecast, and even though it was as bad as the forecasts were showing. So and I'm seeing it a lot this winter. Even people are like, they want a big blizzard. They want another blizzard of 93. And this is the part that people don't think about is that, yes, snowstorms can be fun, but they can also be deadly. So it's real unfortunate. A lot of these, it's not just the southern states that aren't used to it. Pennsylvania led the way with 49 deaths. 48 people were lost at sea. New York had 23 deaths. So even though here in central New York, nobody was reported to get injured from it directly, still across the whole state it was. Some other interesting points. I remember watching a show a few years after, kind of detailing this massive rescue of over 200 hikers from the Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee and North Carolina that got caught in the storm. And I think they kind of knew that the storm was going to be coming, but they probably didn't think too much about it, and then ended up having to get rescued. Um, every major East Coast airport was closed at some point during the storm. Over 3 million people without power. 218 homes at least were destroyed along Long Island and the Outer Banks. And in 1993 dollars, over $6 billion worth of damage from this storm. So any way you cut it, precipitation amounts, wind speeds, deaths, damage, and monetary values, just an absolutely huge, huge storm. Here's a animation of the pressure. So you can see kind of the path it took and how quickly it really strengthens, going from those green colors, which are pressures around 990, all the way down to the pink, which is those 960s. So very, very quickly intensifying as it moves right up that coastal front, right along the coast. Let it go one more time. Here is a picture of wind speeds from 4 p.m. on Saturday. I mostly want to show this because of how broad the intense winds were over the Atlantic Ocean. This is basically like a tropical storm covering the entire western Atlantic Ocean. A lot of these winds are tropical storm force. So obviously, you saw that there were almost 50 deaths at sea, and these winds and high waves were definitely part of that. Speaking of the winds, the highest wind gust was recorded at Mount Washington in New Hampshire, which was 144 miles an hour. Now, Mount Washington, the weather station is literally up on top of the mountain, and it's always extremely windy there. But I mean, still 144 miles an hour is pretty impressive even for Mount Washington. Florida had a gust of 109 miles an hour in the dry Tortugas. That was probably in the squall line, but it wasn't just the squall line. We had a 100-mile-an-hour wind in North Carolina, 90s in Louisiana, 89 on Fire Island, New York. LaGuardia had a gust of 71, Boston 81 miles an hour. So it wasn't just the squall line that had extreme winds. Here are some of the different pressures that were recorded: 960, 0.95 in White Plains, and most of these are records that probably still stand up and down the East Coast. Here's some more temperatures that we got. I already mentioned a few of the deep south temperatures, but it also got very cold. In our region behind it, Burlington, Vermont, -12, Syracuse, -11, Rochester, -4. So nothing like super extreme by our standards, nothing truly, no monthly records were broken or anything, but definitely, some daily record low temperatures set and very, very cold for the middle of March. 1 degree at Pittsburgh, Birmingham, Alabama, 2 degrees. I think I mentioned that one earlier. Philadelphia got down to 11, DC 15, Atlanta, Georgia 18. As far as snowfall amounts, the mountains, Tennessee and North Carolina got up to over 50 inches in some areas. That's what these first three are. Syracuse 43 inches, Albany 27, Pittsburgh 25, Portland, Maine, Asheville, North Carolina, Birmingham, Alabama. Now those are three extremely different places, very far away from each other, and they all got 17 to 20 inches of snow. So that really just, it's such a huge area. Here's the snow map that goes with it. Anywhere in the blue or red color is over 10 inches. So pretty much the entire state of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, most of Massachusetts, Connecticut, all New York, Pennsylvania, all West Virginia, all the way down into Alabama, over 10 inches of snow. Even 1 to 4 inches, all the way down to right on the Gulf Coast, was pretty rare. There is a system for categorizing winter storms after the fact, kind of following the same sort of convention of hurricanes, category 1 through 5, and obviously this is going to be a category 5 type storm. And all these red dots are like 3 feet of snow that were reported in different areas. The models weren't perfect with this, but they did do a pretty good job. Um, the rapid development early on over the Gulf of Mexico wasn't really shown on the models. And so when that squall line came into Florida, that was kind of unexpected and that caught people off guard. But generally, the path of the storm after that was very good. The strength of the storm was very well done on the models. Those consistent forecasts allowed people to take the proper preparations, and it really did help increase the public confidence in weather forecasting. That was a good thing that came out of it. Um, there are, just a couple select storms that you can kind of say in the same breath as the blizzard of 93. In 1888, ironically, on pretty much the same days, March 12th, 1988, or 1888, sorry, another massive nor'easter happened. Saratoga Springs got almost 60 inches, Albany almost 50 inches, New York City even got 21 inches. 200 people in New York City alone died, 200 ships wrecked. And, they didn't have the warnings in 1888 that we had in 1993. So obviously a lot, just a completely different world back then and how they coped with such a massive storm. But that's really the main storm you can compare 93 to is 1888. So in conclusion, this was definitely one of the largest, most destructive winter storms we have on record. Thankfully, it was predicted well in advance and many precautions were taken, and yet over 200 people still died. Um, that's a big reminder that winter storms should be taken seriously. They're not all fun and games necessarily. And just because it has the label storm of the century, that's just a moniker that the media made up. Doesn't mean it couldn't happen again. It's been, we've had 30 winters since then. We haven't had one again like it. And there wasn't one for 105 winters before that. But, you know, nature and the weather doesn't work like that. And it doesn't care that it has only been 30 years since it happened and not 100. It could happen again this winter. Who knows? Um, Probably won't, but you always got to kind of take things seriously and be prepared for it. I had several different sources for the information in this. A couple of different papers from the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, um, some other different books, and lots of data from the Weather Service and Climate Data Center. Um, Most of the graphics I created. There were other ones from the Post Standard that I cited right in the presentation itself. Um, I'll get to that in a second. Um, so that is kind of my overview of the blizzard of 93. Obviously, there's tons of stories, of how people coped with this. And, you know, I don't know if books have been written about it yet, but they probably should be. And just books of people's stories and what they dealt and went through with this. Um, I'm sure a lot of you guys have stories, and we can get to some of those. But I wanted to thank you again for inviting me and having me come talk. And I'll stick around for questions as long as you guys let me. And I did want to mention also real quick that right now I'm in the middle of my calendar sale. So Finger Lakes Weather is funded completely by donors, a couple of local sponsors, a couple of local media partners, and the calendar sales. So I'm able to do talks like this because of those sorts of revenue streams that I've been able to build for my business. I only have the calendar on sale for 2 more days after today. So once Friday comes, and after Friday, I'm going to cut off sales so that I can make sure everybody gets their orders by Christmas, and I can take a little time to breathe for Christmas as well. But it's really, I should just show you guys. I got it right here. Really, it's a very large, heavy duty calendar. It's printed locally here in Auburn. Well, not here, but here in the Finger Lakes in Auburn. It's full 12 by 12-inch size. All the photos were sent to me by followers of my weather forecasts. There's just some really tremendous photos in here. Wintry, muddy Tacanic Falls. Right on the grids, I've got different weather events from years past. Since this is 2024, I've got weather events from years ending in 4 and 9. So every 5, 10, 15, so on years. Down along the side, there's a bunch of stats and records for the region. And I'm just going to flip to March real quick, because I bet there's still some from 1993 showing. Let's see. Oh, yeah, lots of 93s showing in the records. 93 and 1936. So something must have been going on in 1936 too. I'll have to research that. But it's a really nice calendar. People are loving it so far. I also have an option that you can add on weather tracking stickers. So you can track the weather throughout the year, put the stickers right on the days. That's an extra $1. And if you're interested in that, you can find that at just flxweather.com/calendar. And I will throw that in the chat as I stop sharing my screen. See if I can find the chat. Here we go. Okay. So thank you again. And I'm not sure how we want to handle questions, if we can type them in the chat, or if people want to just shout them out, or however you want to do it.
Drew, I think you have one in the chat already.
Yes, I do see that. Yep.
Yeah.
So I'll start with that one. Okay, so it says, how are the weather pattern influenced by the change after the 2023 wildfires in Canadian forests? Anyone studying this? I'm not sure that anybody really knows yet per se. Obviously those fires and all wildfires can really throw things off, over a very large area, as we kind of got a bit of a unique taste for this summer. How, if that's going to still impact the winter, how that's all going to play out. I don't think anybody really knows for sure yet. I'm sure there's probably been some studies on how that sort of thing influences the patterns over the West. Like I said, with the tropics, how the weather just kind of works differently down in the tropics. Well, once you get west of about Colorado, the weather works totally different out there too, because there's so many mountains, and the Pacific Ocean, is such a massive, humongous body of water, that, forecasting for the Western United States is really a whole different ballgame than forecasting for the Eastern United States. The patterns are completely different. The influences are completely different. So I'm not sure how useful a study of Western wildfires on Western weather would be on Eastern wildfires for Eastern weather. So we might just have to kind of wait and see how it plays out.
Yep.
Go ahead. Why don't you go, Rob?
Yeah. You mentioned that the forecasting for the blizzard of 93 increased the reputation of forecasters. I'm wondering, did that progress in the same direction after 93, or has it been up and down in terms of forecasting blizzards and hurricanes and the like?
I would say the skill of weather forecasting has gotten much better. That's been kind of probably a pretty steady, whichever way my camera's showing, a pretty steady trend upward. Now the reputation, that is much more up in the air. Once social media came on the scene, everything changed, and it changed everything, but it's had a big impact on weather forecasts and how weather information gets shared and portrayed. And because there's such an emphasis on the algorithms and getting seen and getting clicks for advertising revenue, there's a lot of weather hype. There's a lot of misinformation that gets spread. Sometimes unintentionally, sometimes, people flat out intentionally taking a picture of a tornado that happened 10 years ago and saying, I saw this afternoon, and, trying to pass stuff off as real. It's completely upended everything. So, as far as, I don't know if weather forecasts are paid more attention to or less now than they were then, if they're trusted more or less. I also, I'm not the sample population for that question, because
Sure.
I'm making my own weather forecasts and not really paying attention to the others. And also, I tend to trust my own usually, except for those storms that are just impossible. And it's like, I don't really know what's going to happen, but here's my best guess.
Okay.
So I would say probably the heyday of people trusting the weather forecast was probably from about the blizzard of '93 up to about maybe the mid 2000s. After that, I would guess that things have probably eroded somewhat since then, even though our skill is getting better.
Thank you.
Ann?
Drew, I had said that, yeah, when I first came on, as many of us do, remember it so specifically, and I really always had the feeling that we were ready for that. And that may have made a big difference in Central New York. And again, it was a weekend, which helped. But we just really knew that this was coming, and it was going to be something we had not seen before. That was the sense we all had. And it played out, which then confirms and made everybody much more confident. I can really attest to what you're saying. It really was the case. And it's probably saved us all, that particularly, again, the weekend helped. And then, I mean, I myself, as I say, whenever from the chapter on meteorology in my earth science course I had to take in order to teach science after I graduated from college, I became crazy about figuring out meteorology to some extent. And I always tend to go to, like, I often go to the Weather Channel only because I don't like all their ads and everything, but you can move the projected radar, and it is interesting that we can now not have to wait till the weather report on a given, you can see it all the time. So for those of us who are really interested in a positive way, I think that computers and putting all the information out there is helpful. But it's terrific when someone really who's got a degree in it explains it to you. So I do watch weather forecasts on TV still, even though I can look at things online.
Yeah, and this goes back a little bit to Rob's question as well. I actually do feel that there probably actually has been some erosion in the science of meteorology as a whole, especially over the last 5 years, I would say. As we get more technology and it's easier for people to make apps and websites and things that show things like the simulated radar, what most of those apps are doing is pulling data from the computer models and then displaying it. It's either going to be a specific computer model. Usually it's kind of a blend of several different computer models. But the problem is that there's no human forecaster kind of acting as a step in between. And I think the sense I get is that weather forecasts in general are starting to get worse because of that. I feel like, 10 years ago when I first started Finger Lakes Weather, even 15 years ago when I first started my first website when I was forecasting locally for Groton, I feel like usually my forecasts were decently in line with what everybody else was saying. But now, I've gotten like ridiculed because my snow amounts are too low sometimes. And it's like, my snow amounts are low because I know that the models always overdo the cold air and the snow, in these mixed precipitation events where it's going back and forth, like kind of like what we had Sunday night. You know, a lot of people were kind of surprised and thrown into a little bit of a panic Sunday night when the Weather Service issued a winter weather advisory. And, you know, my snow map that I put out on Saturday afternoon had 1 to 2, maybe 2 to 4 inches across most of our area. And so that, you know, threw people off. And then, of course, that didn't end up happening. And I have tremendous respect for the Weather Service, and they do great work. But there's, you know, there's always that push to get information out, and it's so easy to get information from the latest models to your Facebook page. The Weather Service actually put out 5 different snow maps this weekend for this little snow event. And it's not like they were just little tweaks here and there. There were some pretty big shifts in that. And I think, you know, that makes it difficult for people to understand what's actually going to happen when you're changing the forecast 5 times. And, you know, some people are seeing the first map on Facebook, showing the map to the second map to some people, the third map to some people. And, you know, most people probably aren't seeing this progression of all 5 maps, and they're getting shared all over. And it's just kind of creating a big confusing mess. And so that's why I've kind of doubled down on trying to make just one snow map for each storm. And, you know, I'm using model data, but I'm incorporating, you know, some actual meteorology in my experience forecasting to make my forecasts. And you know, when you see a snow map for me, I've hand drawn that. And so every little bump and curve in the snow lines, you know, those are deliberate decisions that I'm making. And I'm actually thinking that I might start live streaming my snow map creation, so I can kind of talk about why I'm making those decisions as I'm doing it. Because most of the things you see on your phone apps and, you know, and the websites, it's model data, and, you know, there's not actually a meteorologist looking at it necessarily to adjust it at all. So that's my little current weather forecasting rant. So
So, Drew, I have 3 things. First of all, I want to thank you. We're not getting off, but I wanted to thank you for doing this. And it's one of several that you've done for us in the past. And I'd like you to think about what other possibilities there are that you would be willing to do for us. But then also, I wanted to get your prediction on what we should expect for the rest of the winter. And I wanted to be very specific about March 1. No, I'm in general.
Yeah. So in general, seasonal forecasts are very unreliable. And, you know, going back to the whole big spiel I just gave, a lot of them are mostly designed to get you to click on them and read them, because then they get the advertising money. Which is why it almost always sounds like they're going to be really cold, heavy snow winters. It's like when you see a winter weather forecast in September, it's almost always, this is going to be a bad winter, because that's what's going to get people to click. So this year, that being said, this year we are in a pretty strong El Nino. El Nino, even with El Nino, there's different flavors of El Nino, depending on where exactly the Pacific Ocean is warming. Most El Nino winters in our area tend to be light on snowfall and warm in temperatures, which is kind of what we're seeing so far. The pattern so far has been very typical of an El Nino. I will say that some of these snowiest winters we've had have also come in El Nino years. So it's not a perfect 1-to-1. El Nino means not a lot of snow. And I feel like, I might be wrong about this, but I feel like when we do get a snowy El Nino, it's kind of heavy on the backside. So February, March. Let me just pull up real quick. I almost feel like 93 may have been El Nino.
While you're doing that, I think everybody, Rob, you're not on mute and I'm not on mute, but is anybody else getting this interference? Yeah, it's like there's a conversation going on in the back, but
Yeah, I hear like an echo.
Is that what it is? Okay,
Yeah.
maybe we can't do anything. I know I can't do anything about it, but. Oh, and Drew, you've also got a question, a hand raised waiting, so,
Okay.
so,
Yeah. Let's see, 92, 93 is actually a pretty much neutral, so that wasn't, the year before was a strong El Nino. So we got the blizzard of 78 is the biggest snowstorm I've experienced. I was living in Massachusetts. Is that local to the northeast? I'm not immediately familiar with that one. Let me do a quick search. Sometimes there's really good snow maps you can find. The Great Blizzard of 1978.
so you're looking back historically to see what has happened
Yeah.
in strong El Niños?
This one I'm just looking specifically at 78. It looks like it was kind of contained to, if this is the same storm that you're remembering, the northeast and maybe back in the Ohio Valley a little bit. I'd have to do a little more digging to see, maybe what we got here in Ithaca and some of the more specifics about that one. But you can always, Google things and or if you want to email me, drew@flxweather.com. I can get back to you with some more information
Oh,
about
no,
it.
that's okay. I didn't mean, I certainly didn't mean to put you on the
Oh,
spot.
no. That's okay.
But, there's another question.
Yes.
Birgit, yeah, yeah.
Hi, Drew. I am an ardent reader of your Finger Lakes weather, and I believe that you are the most accurate forecast for Ithaca, at least.
Thank you.
It beats any other forecast.
Thank you.
And I definitely like your idea of live streaming
Okay.
to get even better picture of what's going on.
Well, if we get some more snow anytime soon, I'll give that a try.
Okay, you will see it.
I imagine that would probably be something pretty popular. I wrote a big blog post Monday afternoon, kind of outlining how I do snow maps and everything. I should just like live stream it sometime and let people see the process. So keep an eye out for it. I'll try to do it at some point. I would say this winter, but who knows if we'll get anything worth putting a snow map out for again.
So Drew, are there any other questions? I don't want to bump it again. Okay. Drew, the last time we had you, you were able to tell us what sorts of presentations you had in the can and were willing to do. And
Yes.
I'm hoping you would be willing to do another one for us, just, obviously not next week, but, but I'm wondering if you could mention the ones that maybe that you have prepared already or that you would be willing to do and
Yes.
people can weigh in on what they're interested in.
My first question is, do you remember which ones I have
Mm.
done for you guys? I imagine I probably did my kind of general weather talk. This is how modern meteorology works.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I did any other event specific ones.
Yeah, Anne Levittich, do you remember? You're on mute, Anne. Because Anne was the one who contacted you in the first place. You might have a better memory.
I know I contacted him. I don't remember specifically.
It was a while ago, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No, maybe we could find it in
We can
archive.
dig up that information for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
they were recorded.
Yes,
sure I've
of
got it in
course,
my
we'll
email,
find it.
too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I know that
Suzanne
This-
says 72 Hurricane Agnes.
that would be a good
That-
one. This past year I made a new talk on the severe weather season of 1998. I did that as kind of like a 25-year anniversary. So that includes the Labor Day storm that I mentioned in this talk. But that was just the whole year, 1998 was crazy from a severe weather standpoint. I found a report of like 1.5-inch hail in January from, I think it was over towards Oneonta or something. There was some massive tornado events, massive by our standards, and again, several sorts of records set. So I have a talk on that.
Okay.
I also have a talk on severe weather event in 2014. So we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of that next year. That spawned a tornado in Madison County that unfortunately killed 4 people. And that alone makes it memorable. But kind of the eye-opening thing about that event is that the tornado developed and dissipated between scans of the radar. And so the Weather Service never even really saw it coming. There was never a tornado warning issued for it. And it's
Mhm.
just like, for something like that to happen here in upstate New York, it
Well,
was,
that one would scare the hell out of all of us.
yeah. It was an eye-opening one. And that storm cell actually, before it went up there and produced that tornado, was the same storm cell that came through Groton here. Thankfully, nothing like what it ended up becoming, but did knock our power out for several hours. I haven't given that one in a few years, so I imagine I had some sort of a hopeful, positive note at the end of that one. I think I've got a presentation on the Southern Tier floods in 2011. I think I made that special for something, so I think I've only given it once. Let's see what else I got here.
So Leslie, are you still
Yeah,
on?
I'm there.
So would it be possible, you have a record of who attended this one?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so is it possible that if Drew came up with some suggestions that we could poll the group? Because
Great
presumably
idea. That's a
anybody
great idea.
who's into
Sure.
weather might do so again. Is that worth doing? Or would you, would you be willing to do that, Leslie?
I'm happy to do it. Absolutely.
Okay, so Drew, Leslie will be in touch with you about your suggestions, but and this is not going to be for a while. Obviously we don't want to have you coming to us weekly. But Leslie will be in touch, and then she'll poll this group about what they would most like to hear. Because I can't say enough that you have made weather accessible to me.
Oh, that's great to hear. And
Yeah.
I'm, part of the really fun thing about doing the calendar for me is when I'm trying to find events to put right on the grid for the months, because I'm uncovering all sorts of fascinating things that, just have gotten forgotten over the years.
Yeah.
So,
And then you go down the rabbit hole.
yeah. So, getting some, I could just do like, cool weather events in history, sort of,
Ooh.
there's so many possibilities.
Yes.
that
Well,
I
you
could
think
do,
about it,
so.
and think about what you are willing to do, because you've obviously got some prepared already, and that would be easier for you to do than all of a sudden researching a whole new thing, which you may want to do. And
Yeah, but
that's fine.
the nice thing is once you research and then put it together, then you can give it to multiple groups and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Anne, do you have a question?
Yeah, you mentioned the flooding in the southern tier in 72. How far south do you cover?
my general forecasts go down to the Pennsylvania border.
You
So-
go east of Binghamton?
I actually don't
My
remember
little
why
village my hometown got flooded that year,
Yeah.
which is highly unusual.
Yeah, I do Cortland County, Tioga County, and Onondaga County. That's my eastern border. So I don't actually do Binghamton. I'm not sure why I drew the lines that way. I
Yeah.
guess
Okay.
I didn't consider Binghamton's Finger Lakes enough. But
Do you
then
do Corning?
I do Corning, yep. And then,
Uh,
but for some reason, I also have like Batavia in my zone. They're not Finger Lakes. I've been thinking about cutting Genesee County out.
I'm just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, in all, I cover 17 counties right now.
Yeah.
Across the region, so.
Well,
Pretty
I
big area.
always enjoy your talks,
Well, thank you very much.
and I have to leave the meeting, so.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I turned you off because my phone was ringing, but the Corning floods, that those were in what was it, in the 70s?
Yeah, I believe it was 72 is the big one. I got a book.
Yeah. mean,
Yep,
That was
72.
Hurricane Agnes.
Hurricane Agnes.
okay, so
So
yeah.
I've got this book here on that.
Oh, yeah,
You've
those.
probably
the-
seen those sorts of books around.
Yes,
in
yeah,
stores. They're
exactly. Can you hold it up
really-
again, Drew?
Yep.
Alan was kind of looking at it.
1972 flood, New
Yeah.
York, Southern.
It's that
Tier.
series that you find in
Yeah.
bookstores, you know, the history of Ithaca,
Yeah,
you know,
it's
the
Arcadia
history of your
Publishing.
neighborhood.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of great pictures in there. Not a lot of meteorology in there per se, but
Okay.
you know, a storm like Agnes, it's going to be plenty of information out there to get.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, anyway, to reiterate, if Leslie's willing to poll the group, your willingness to do this is really much appreciated. And if you can, you know, make a small list of, well, it can be a long list, but something that is not infringing on your on your lovely willingness to do
Absolutely.
this.
Yeah.
And then we'll be back in touch. You know, Anne is
Okay.
our weather guru connector, right, Anne?
Sure.
This is how you get volunteers. You say, Anne is our guru connector. So
All right. Well, thank you so
Okay.
much again for
Thank you.
having me. I really appreciate it.
thank you, Drew.
I love talking about this stuff,
appreciate it.
so it's always
All right.
fun.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.